Mr. Chad Fowler, welcome to the REI Diamond Show. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Dan. Look forward to our
Yeah, so
conversation.
so for the listeners here, you're with HED Design and you're on the mission critical team, which is mostly focused on data center development, I guess data center design, throughout the US and around the world, or what's the deal with that?
We're primarily in U.S. based. Um, the global market is there, and it's something that we have done a little bit of work in future expansion.
Perfect. So this will be a little bit of a diversion from probably a lot of the topics that we have on the show here, but I think this actually fits for a few reasons. Number one, we're talking about real estate development. I'd argue one of the most niche value. I would probably guess this is the highest value per square foot transactions that we saw in 2024 and 2023, if I had to guess, on a price per square foot basis. Like $2,300 a square foot, I think, was one recently traded in Elk Grove Village, which our Chicago audience will know that name, but maybe not so much the rest of the folks around the country. Um, so we have real estate development, really high price niche kind of real estate that we normally probably don't look at. But I thought, hey, this is really an interesting topic. And I think I'm hoping we can get a nice little overview of the industry on today's podcast episode. Chad, what else did I miss from the short introduction here that might help fill in any holes?
I'll expand a little bit. I am an architect by training, so that is my background is architecture. HED is an interdisciplinary company concentrating on promote and advancing our world. It is where we focus on positive impact and the future of what we can offer to our built environment and our communities.
Very cool. Okay, so why don't we start with defining a data center? What is a data center? And maybe it's like you're defining one in the last 18 months, because I'm betting that this industry has moved a whole lot in the 20 or 30 years that you guys have been designing these things.
No, it certainly has. Yeah. It's a whole different world now than when it started. Very exciting time. Data centers. We are interacting with a data center right now. How you and I are talking virtually, our everyday lives are becoming connected to data centers. The more and more technology we use, so that's driving this rapid expansion in the market, and a lot of other factors. So what are they? What are they? They are information um, storage locations. Um, they're information hubs transferring from one location to another location. They are areas that do calculations. There are areas AI. So let's just jump to the AI. AI learning, AI calculations, AI data is all stored, developed, and figured out in a data center. They can be large facilities. They can also be small facilities. Every office function has a need for some small or medium data center component. Um, they can either be housed within by themselves and operated by themselves, or they go to co-location providers, which are larger facilities, and they become part of that larger infrastructure. Um,
On the small end versus the large end in number of square feet, just to kind of talk real estate, what are we thinking? I mean, 200,000 on the large end.
that's a decent sized medium building, 200,000 square
Okay.
feet. The smaller ones could be 10,000 square feet, 10, 20, 50,000 square feet. That's kind of on the smaller side. Um, Larger, you're getting into up to 1 million square feet in there.
Wow.
And the power consumption of those are really astronomical when you think about it. So let's say the 200,000 square foot building you're talking about 2, 3 years ago, we're looking at 36 megawatts of IT load. So that's infrastructure load. That is the power that is going to the servers, which is what is housed within the data center. Then on top of that, you have to add all the power that is associated with cooling. As you're using that power, it generates a significant amount of heat, and you have to provide the cooling in order to the heat reject that. Um, and then just the overall loads within the building. So we're looking at for 36 megawatts, you're looking at 36 plus megawatts for total power consumption within that building. It's really depending on the efficiency you are there. Um,
If we were to
uh,
put that in context, like what is that? Is that like 600 houses worth of power? Like,
you are
how could
close
we?
to, yeah, you're talking about towns
Okay.
on that, and this is going into a 200,000 square foot facility. So when you look at that all within a spot, that is enormous amount of power.
Wow. So that was 2 or 3 years ago, you said, right?
2 or 3 years ago.
What
So
about
so
now?
so now, um, now we're getting to the point where we're not even sure how much power we can fit in that 200,000 square feet. Um, AI has really changed our environment and our world to be something completely different. Um, uh, NVIDIA, you hear a lot of new in the news, a lot about NVIDIA, what they're doing, what other of these companies similar to them are producing. Um, uh, their rollouts are taking an enormous amount of power and putting them in a very small square footage space. So if we take that 200,000 square foot building, 36 megawatts, let's say, in there, um, that would be right now today, you're almost doubling that power to that same square footage.
Wow.
The challenge is that's driving is how do you take all that electricity, that heat that is generated in a smaller footprint, and how are you handling that? So historically, that was done by air distribution going over the servers, and air management. So the supply air, which is cooled, is forced through the inlet of the servers. It is then separated as it comes out the back of the servers, which is the hot air, and then that recycles back into server. Um, you can get um, you can get into the servers in this an individual server. And a server is roughly 2 foot by 4 foot, let's say, and it can vary
Okay.
by, let's say it's 8 feet tall. So that's one server. So one server is was historically somewhere between the 8 and 10 kW per cabinet. Um, Now that same cabinet, that same footprint, instead of that, let's say in the high end, and that's 10 kW power, we're looking at um, we're looking at 30 kW, 40 kW, 50 kW,
Hmm.
even more.
And
So
mostly that's the AI trend and NVIDIA's new chips and that kind of thing we hear a lot about.
we're hearing all about those are facility and the ability in order to do all that compute power in such a small area and so efficiently. So now, in order to get there, you're actually providing a liquid based or some sort
Mm,
of transferable based cooling medium that is transferred, and it's going directly into the servers are the individual pieces within that cabinet, which is 2 foot by 4 foot piece. It's going directly into there, and in some cases, directly to that chip to provide the cooling exactly where you need to provide it at those densities. So those
it's almost
technologies
yeah,
are
it's almost following the trend of the automobile, right? I think the early Henry Ford, Model
that's
Ts were air cooled, right? And now you got a radiator in the car and you're using antifreeze and a water pump, and you got the radiator kind of in the front catching the air going with a liquid base. That's amazing that computer power now requires that technological leap.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Think about you're sitting there, you're sitting at a computer right now. That computer is going to have a bunch of wires for that's your power and your connectivity to the outside world. Then provide another a couple other connections there where some sort of liquid is going in there just to cool what's inside your small little computer you on your desk.
That's
Um,
wild. So we have a challenge too, right? So now you're generating all this power. I remember a few years ago, I read something, I can't remember if it was a book or what. Bill Gates, probably 5, 7 years ago, and I remember he was kind of pitching the platform of nuclear power. And he said, "Oh, we're going to run out of energy." And I'm thinking to myself, well, man, that's, because obviously electric cars are coming and I get where he's coming from. What a nice guy that he wants to get us on nuclear so that we could have plenty of power for our air conditioner and refrigerator. And now I'm coming to the realization he knew AI was a thing. They had data centers everywhere. Microsoft is one of the most cutting edge companies, certainly in tech and maybe in the world right now. And I'm like, oh, he saw this coming, and we need nuclear power to like power these data centers. So I guess it was more of a sort of a business initiative on his part. Do you think that package nuclear power plant facilities are in our future here in the next 5 to 10 years, Chad? Like where a data center is now going to have its own uranium pellet that's providing this kind of power?
it's an interesting thought. Yes, in the short term, I think something, if not that, it's going to be something similar to that we see happen. Right now, you're seeing the large tech companies such as Microsoft and other. They're looking at acquiring locations and restarting nuclear power plants. That just happened
Okay.
recently within the Northeast. Now, what you were talking about is the kind of the small nuclear reactors, the module pieces that could be located on locations. That is a hot topic. I think there's a lot of regulations that need to be kind of figured out, and how do you get those in certain locations and jurisdictions? How does the community understand what it means to have that? It's a scary word, right? For
Oh
those
yeah.
that grew up in in the 20, 30, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, that was certainly something that was not necessarily viewed as positive. And kind of the
I
market.
still don't know. What was it? Fukushima went like a
Yeah.
few years ago, and like that was kind of a big deal, and it was scary, and it still is scary. So it still is scary to think we would have these little trailers dropped off with little miniature nuclear devices in them that's going to be powering not my backyard.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think, and when you mentioned Bill Gates, his what he's doing, it's evaluating new technology and how that can be safer than what it was historically, how we've been using it and what our views are on that. So I believe, and I don't know a lot of information about it. In somewhere in the west, I think the Wyoming area. I think he's actually rolling out a trial of that technology. Um, um, that's my belief. I believe, and once that happens, I'm assuming that'll help open the doors for more of that to come.
Yeah, and I think his had to do with using the spent rods from the nuclear facilities, which is a big problem to store those in New Mexico, I think, in some mountain somewhere. Like we're gonna run out of place to put that stuff, and this new technology is supposed to kind of recycle that. And I guess we're out on a limb calling nuclear a green technology. I mean, I think it glows green, so we do have that.
It does do that. It does do that. Yeah, yeah. It is. Um, yeah, they all have their upside and their downside, right? Yeah. But I think it is right now the technology that's not fossil fueled, that can efficiently provide the power that really the country is looking to move into. Um, as we move off fossil fuel, um, driven appliances and cars and all that stuff, there's still the power has to be generated in some fashion in order to get it to those points. So the advancement in that technology or other technologies is going to be vital in order to keep going.
Must happen. So while we're on the green topic, are there some, green design techniques that maybe were developed in the last 2 to 5 years that you guys have installed in data centers that might be helping with the problem of the cooling, the large amount of power, maybe just the way that the properties look? I don't know.
Um, there's a lot of that going on. Um, it's hard to point to one specific thing. I will say, um, the data center market uses an enormous amount of energy. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. Now, what you want to do is make the usage of that energy as efficient as possible. So there's a metric that is used in the industry. It's called PUE. Now, the PUE measures the amount of power that goes to the building, and then the amount of that power that is used for IT, the in-source, the servers. So historically, if you're looking back 20, 30 years ago, you were looking at facilities that the PUE was 2 plus, which was meaning for every amount of power that was going to the server, you were using that same amount of power to your building and to cooling technology. So two is not a good number. One would be all the power going to that building is going straight to your IT. Now we're designing the facilities that are much closer to that one. So 1.2, a little bit one below that, 1.15. Um, and so you can see where we started and where we currently are. I mean, ideally somewhere we'll get into below one, right? And where we're actually generating power and pushing it back. But so how do we get there, and how does sustainability come into that answer? So the market drives a lot of research, a lot of motivation to make that more efficient. So cooling technologies, the advancement over the 5 years of how efficiently the cooling technology is distributing that air to the servers, and just functionally how much power it takes to make those work has grown substantially. The large tech companies, the large REITs that are developing, they're all working with manufacturers in order to help those manufacturers develop equipment that operates the most efficiently that it can. That means more money in your development, right? At the end of the day, you're saving money on the operations and overall. Other aspects in technology is certainly, in sustainability is with the building itself. I think there's more of a concentration to make buildings themselves either some sort of LEED level, higher carbon footprint, evaluating how all that goes into the buildings, what material you're using, what's the efficiency there. Also, location becomes a big driver. Geographic location is the power you're going to ultimately utilize. Where does that come from? Pacific Northwest, there's a lot of hydropower up there. So there's the good and bad of hydropower, right? But it's generally a green power source. And then we're talking about nuclear before. So if it's nuclear sourced, but by far, most of it's still fossil fuel driven. And so,
And when we talk about the location, Chad, you can't just put these out in the middle of Wyoming either, right? Don't they sort of have to be near the population base due to distance, or with the technology for data transfer, can it literally be halfway around the world and it doesn't matter?
It's really what's happening in the data center. Um, some of the AI stuff that's going on right now really can be in the middle of Wyoming, because it's actually self-perpetuating. It's working within itself, and then it's sending information out. It's not it's not as critical how we'll say latency, which is how much time it takes the information to go from that server to you. Um, but there are things that are latency dependent, right? So at night, if you're going to go log on to Netflix and you want to start up your movie, you don't want to sit there and see that wheel spinning for even 10 seconds. You're going, what's wrong
Not
with
even
my
3 seconds.
right? Exactly. That's an eternity. So those are the areas where you want that proximity is vital. And then certainly if you get to the financial world, stock market, you're getting certainly milliseconds is critical as well.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the AI can be slightly latent, and I think we're forgiving right now because AI is a new technology. So you go in and you do deep research in AI, Gemini, Google's version. You set up your prompts and then admit what 5, 10 minutes later, you get back this nice report. That report probably could have been done by McKinsey or something and probably would have taken 30 days. We're willing to wait 8 minutes for that now, right? But what's
Yep.
that going to look like in, 5 years from now? Is it kind of be like dial-up modem and all of a sudden this, Wyoming AI data centers? Who's going
Yeah.
to rent that? That thing's bankrupt. What idiot thought that was a good idea? Um, but one thing on AI, I took a call. I can't remember what the call was, but I remember thinking there's a big pregnant pause. I think this is AI. It felt like latency. Now, I didn't ask it if it was AI, but the voice sure sounded robotic. And it was
Hmm.
some kind of confirmation called, customer service thing. Somewhere AI certainly would be plugged in. It got whatever I was looking for done because I don't remember being frustrated at the end, but I remember thinking there's this odd long pause. And maybe that's the latency of the distance to the data centers that they're using now, right?
Yeah, it could be. It could be certainly
Yeah.
something. I unfortunately answered a robocall yesterday because I was thinking it was something else, and I had a similar experience where I started to say hello, and then there was a pause. I'm like, oh, maybe no one's there. Then someone started to talk, and then I responded. Then there was the pause, and I'm like, oh, okay.
Talking to a machine.
A machine. And certainly in our future, that's going to change. It's got to change, right? There's going to be some sort of prompt. There's going to be a point where we're not going to know what that is. But I think AI, there's a huge boom in AI and how and what we use it for. I don't even think we know how we're going to ultimately use it yet. Sure, somebody does, but it's going to continue and continue and continue to improve as it develops. And really, the data centers that we're doing now are really facilitating those AI to become what it will be in the future. Because there is a learning environment to AI. It's not our learning per se, but it's gotta have that data, and you gotta feed that data into it in order to be able to
Do
understand.
do you think, I mean, you've been uh present and operating as an architect for the past 30 years, which was what you mentioned before we started the call here today. So that would have put us through the dot-com boom and bust. And we're in the
Yep.
AI boom right now. And I wonder from your perspective, with the number and size of centers and the kind of money that's thrown around for these things, I believe they overbuilt the data centers in like 96, 97, 98, 99, 2000. They were building and building and building and built way more capacity than we needed up until about, what was it, 03, 04, 05, when video finally came online. Suddenly we didn't have enough capacity anymore. Do you feel like we're at the peak of data center development yet? Or maybe I'm totally off base and we still have such a humongous runway to go. It's like unexplainable.
And certainly, I think about the .com days certainly, and when that's coming again. Uh, I don't think we're there yet. I mean, I think that was way before its time, the dot-com kind of boom. As we saw, it was kind of prepping for something that never wasn't happening at the same speed.
Pace, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, but um, but now, what I'm my understanding of the people that are driving this market, what their plans are over the next year. I mean, the amount of money that they're pouring into this is mind-boggling, and will continue to grow probably for the foreseeable future. It is going to change. When will that happen? I don't know, but it's not going to be in the next. I would say not. Certainly not the next 5+ years.
Okay. Wow. So I guess we should all buy more NVIDIA stock then. Is that kind of the
I know. It's yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just starting, right? That's gonna. There's gonna be more of them. They're starting. Everybody. There's others that are developing it. Um, and where I mean, where we are in the data center development and what those mean is we don't understand what that means to the buildings still. Um, uh, right now, in order to deploy like a NVIDIA lineup, you're going into say a 60,000 square foot computer room. That's what we call white space, where historically would be lines and lines and lines of cabinets and servers. You're going in a room, and there's 10% of that room being utilized for the NVIDIA servers. That's it. So it's a big empty space. So really, how we plan and how we how we plan the buildings, and how do we make these buildings more efficient is something that is coming and will start to happen over the next few years, as we see how we can provide all the backbone of the equipment and get that cooling and that power to such a small space.
So are you telling me that, someone built how big is the actual building? Is it like 80,000 feet to make a 60,000 foot white
Well,
space?
when I say a 60,000 square foot white space, there could be six of those within a 200,000 that 200,000 square foot
Okay.
building. Um, um, you're saying there's well, actually, that one would have less than six of them, but yeah, that's
Understood, understood. So
uh, so
10% is the NVIDIA build out.
yeah,
Is the rest just vacant for future expansion or
it's
like,
vacant because there's no additional power to be used there, and I mean that's
oh
an
wow.
extreme event. That's an extreme
Okay. Okay.
event. A
So
lot of
we're not
people
building a bunch
mix
of
it.
empty data centers as we speak. That's not
No,
happening.
it is. It
Gotcha.
is. It's what that's driving change in the industry, and so um it's exciting to see what's going to happen.
Would you mind breaking down sort of the owners? Like, we mentioned REITs and we think, REITs is like renting out the space. Are we talking 200,000 square feet and the whole thing is rented to Amazon Web Service? I mean, they probably are building their own for AWS and they are 100% full, but like, what's the makeup of a 200,000 square foot building with 360,000 square foot white spaces? I mean, are they all one tenant? Are there like 17 tenants? What's kind of the business model behind the scene, Chad, if you know?
It's any and all above, to be really. Right now, the large tech companies, like as you mentioned, Amazon, the Microsofts, all those of the world, are expanding so fast that they're building their own facilities and operating their own facilities. They're also going to um, these REITs and taking an entire building that they've built and developed, just because they can get that online faster than they can develop their own buildings. So that's the speed of market that they're working under. Um, so that's a big impact that's happening there now. But historically, there's a mixture. I think different companies have different philosophies on how to do that. there are a number of REITs that kind of um, develop the computers, and then they lease. It's very much co-location, so they're either leasing cabinet space. So it could be one cabinet to a client. It could be 10 cabinets in a room that could house 1,000 cabinets. So there's a breakdown on that. And then there's the in between that you have uh, companies that need the compute power of 6 megawatts, 8 megawatts, 10 megawatts of power, and they lease the entire room. So that's all their room in order to do what their requirements are. Um, so any and all above. But by far the biggest impact right now is from those large tech companies there. When you're taking whole buildings down, that's really the ultimate goal in that world.
Yeah, so are they built on spec and then they put them out as like sort of a co-location and Microsoft's like, hey, we need it all. Here's a lease. Is that kind of how they're going down?
Kind of, yeah. You might
Okay.
have to tweak. You might have to make some adjustments in order to because their kit that they put in there, which is all their servers and things, might need have a few different requirements than what that spec build has. So you might have to make some modifications in order to
So
ultimately
that would be the developer or the owner of the building is making those modifications on their dime, and now Microsoft comes in and will take that for 5 or 10 year lease, something like that.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. I guess one of the risks, if I'm the developer and I build a site, I mean, some new chip could come in. AI could design some better version of itself in a utopian world.
Right, right,
And
right, exactly. Yeah.
yeah, right. And suddenly, what used to take 60,000 square feet happens on one server rack, and now we're overbuilt. And then the other thing is that the technology is moving so fast, I would imagine you would know more than me, but in 30 years, how fast technology move where after Microsoft has gone, now the layout where they were all air cooled servers, now they're all liquid cooled servers. Like I don't know what more modification would be necessary for that landlord, but you'd have a pretty big bill to sort of upgrade the technology at the end of each lease, right?
There is. But I mean, there's still facilities that are operating that were built 20 years ago in these co-location
Okay.
spaces. Some of those were long-term leases, but they do flip. There's still a market that people do not need these high densities that we're talking about. It is the hot topic in our world in data center design right now. These enormous loads because that's driving all the change. But there's still a strong market of people in the smaller avenue that can still accommodate the historical loading power densities that older facilities were designed for. But I mean, as designers, forward thinking. I mean, you can't. There's a lot of unknown when it's going to happen. But you do want to design a facility that is purposely built for what it's doing today, but in many cases, some philosophy or thought is given in order to if it needs to change.
Can you give me an
So
example of a design decision that fell into that latter category?
sure. So and it's actually very common right now. Will it need liquid cooling? Well, when you're building when you're designing a space and you're building it on spec, will it need liquid cooling? Will it not need liquid cooling? You don't know. You don't know what those requirements are. So what you're looking at the facility and looking at ways your base design will not incorporate liquid cooling, but your planning will allow that to come in down sometime down the road. Hopefully it's still in design, or if it's being built, it's easily flexible in order to pivot without having to adjust really the bones of the building, right? You need it. You need to have your structural loading in order to accommodate. You don't want to go back in and reinforce everything. You want to have your clearances able to accommodate the additional equipment relaying out the whole building and possibly losing um, some leasable space. So those things are kind of those are the things that we're looking at now in the planning to make sure that there is flexibility for what we see possibly coming down the road now.
And is that
What
as simple as a 24-inch, between or underneath of the floor where the servers sit with flexible panels or something like that that would allow someone to modify that at a future date?
somewhat right now the raised floor system is less and less facilities are using that.
Okay.
24 was is kind of a lower density height. We're getting commonly we're 30, 36 inches or more in order to get the air up to that 10 kW, kind of what we were talking about before. But um, now the raised floor is going away, and the room is actually being pressurized in order to do that. So air management is critical. So
Mm.
there is a planning when you're planning the facility. It is important to you are planning hot and cold aisles. Kind of what I was talking about. The servers have intake. That's where the cold air comes out, and then it has exhaust. That's where the hot air comes out. So you never want those two to mix. So there's containment that actually surround the servers so that those two, the cold air being blown within the space and that hot air being pulled back to the units um, to be cooled again, don't cross.
Mm.
Which is
Were they
which
like
is
were
one of
they
the
like that?
efficiencies.
Were they like that like 15, 20 years ago too?
Uh, so when I started my career, you'd walk into a facility and the servers were blowing hot air into the intake, and then it was a disaster.
That's what I thought.
and so and so it's funny to look back and think that's what was going on, and now it's unheard of. You would never do that. Why you'd walk in and that management philosophy would be certainly the first thing you would say: fix your airflow. You got to fix your airflow in order to be more efficient in your power consumption.
Well, I
So
mean, I
so
imagine that's not cheap to do that though. I mean, 15,
no,
20 years ago, if it wasn't necessary, then why would you want to spend all the time with, I don't know, plexiglass walls and
yeah,
sealant and everything? It's like real expensive to put that. Like, come on, man, we're just trying to get this thing leased.
exactly, yeah, yeah. Um, Right, and who would have thought you would have been in this problem that
Right?
you got into? But yeah, over the last certainly 15, 20 years, yeah, 15, 10, 15 years, there's more of a concentration on making sure that doesn't happen in that containment.
Yeah, it's smart. Speaking of the costs to build, do you have any big numbers per square foot or anything like that you've seen go down? I mean, what's it cost? If they're spending $2,300 a foot to buy an existing data center, and I think they were going to put another $1 billion into it or something like that. But I mean, what is it? $2,100 a foot to build it? $1,600 a foot to build it? Or does this like include all the computer equipment as well?
So there's a lot there. Um, the land in the building is an enormous cost because it has all the equipment, but that the IT build out of that is 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 something I can't even guess for you right now. The costs that I'm seeing on single cabinets on some of these servers are in multi-million dollar range.
Wow.
So millions and millions of dollars. So I'm not even going to go to what the IT kit costs. To be honest with
All
you,
right, all right.
um, but on developing the buildings, um, I don't have a good recent metric. Um, I there was a time that it was we were quoting kind of $10 million a megawatt, but now I think with the things that are changing and the demand on the sector, that those numbers are increasing.
Interesting. So it's probably going to be more than I think we're spending. Spending like $106 a foot to build a 3-story Class A self-storage facility in Lawrenceville, Georgia. So I
Okay.
can't just go throw a couple racks in there and call it a data center and we'll just,
Well, you could. I'm not sure how much you're going to lease it for. The tenants are not going to be your return on investment might be a little different.
Yeah, we'd have to go after that old 20 years old racks that's still operating secondary market, it sounds like.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, $500 a foot, 400 a foot, do you think, for the envelope,
Um,
if you had to guess?
I think it's somewhere in there. I don't quote me on that.
Yeah, no one's gonna call you from my audience and try to build one and be like, "Yo, Chad, you said this was 400. What do you mean
Yeah,
750?" You're like, "Inflation, bud. What do you want me to do?"
yeah, exactly. It's a moving target, but yeah, I would say something in that range on a square foot basis would be.
Cool. What else did I forget to ask that you feel like might be interesting or important for the listeners here before we wrap up?
Um, I guess, and something interesting in this space is data centers have gotten a lot of bad publicity. They use a lot of energy. They're dirty. They're loud. Um, and I think there's a lot of concentration on what we're doing now is to try to educate the public on what is a data center, right? I mean, do you know every time you go on social media you're connecting to a data center? Um, I don't think generally people understand how that affects their daily lives and what it means to us. So communities are a little, let's say, shy, and I don't want that development in my backyard right now. So I think I think as an industry, we're looking at kind of expanding our education to the world on how do you use them. They're not scary. Um, if you look at buildings that were done 20 years ago, yeah, they're gray boxes behind this big security fence. They're somewhere you never go. You're not allowed to go there. So how do we change that image? There's a lot of um, there's a lot of push within jurisdictions and other areas that buildings are contextually designed to fit within the spaces. So that is a little bit more community friendly. Certainly, and then educating people on how and what and why they're there is one thing. What are the benefits they bring to the community in lives? Um, and then also educating. It's a market that's growing so much that it's hard to find people to come in and help design one, help operate. There's not enough people operating them. There's not enough people to construct them. The skilled
Wow.
labor that are associated that with. So I think really seeing a more push in the education front in order to promote communities allowing more of these, understanding them, also promoting knowledge in what it takes to design, operate, um, or build these facilities in order to encourage people to come into the trades or the or design aspects of the space.
Yeah, and it doesn't sound any different than anything we ever get entitled or improved. Like, it doesn't matter if it's a single family house, a shed or a hot tub in the backyard,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
or, a storage facility or a giant flex warehouse. Like, they never want it done. Everyone
no,
hates it.
yeah,
They don't
yeah.
want the corners, turned into a Wawa, which is the convenience store in the northeastern United States where I grew up. They don't
Yep.
want it there, but then they shop there and get their gas there, and they're there like 5 out of 7 days a week anyway. It's like, wait a minute, you guys were fighting this. What are you doing? Um, but a data center does not necessarily have heavy truck traffic in and out all the time. Once
It
everything's
doesn't.
delivered.
I mean, you're right. Your biggest demand is under construction, and when you're building it out, the rest, the actual amount of people in the spaces is minuscule compared to the size of the building and the traffic. So there's a lot of benefits in some cases, a lot of communities, because you don't have to upgrade all of your support areas, your roadways, your all that, because of you're not it's not a big office space where you're um having 1,000 people go to that facility.
Yeah, or 1,000 trucks and
Right.
million
In and
square foot, bomber of an industrial warehouse is never going to
out.
work. Before I ask my final question, Chad, is there anywhere listeners can go to get some more information about this, you, or maybe HED Design?
Sure. Happy to have anybody visit our website. Website is hed.design. So you can learn more about us and what we do there.
Nice. And my final question, Chad, what is the kindest thing anyone has ever done for you?
Hmm. That is an interesting question. The kindest thing. Um, I don't think I'd be where I am without many people doing a lot of kind things for me. Um, and certainly, how do you pick one of those out of all of them? That's a difficult choice. Um, I guess I mean when you look at it, it falls to family. I think is the kindest thing. Um, uh, Certainly all my family and my coworkers and everybody does an immense thing. But I have kids. I gotta say, just when your I have two sons. When one of them runs up and gives you a hug, and that really is the kindest thing that happens to me any time. That's it.
I love it. I love it. Hey, I have pages and pages of notes here. I really appreciate you coming on the show and giving us your time. What an interesting topic at the forefront of our technological revolution known as human existence here. Thank you, Chad, for coming on the show.
I thank you for having me, Dan. It's great to talk to you.